The vaccination of teachers and school staff kicks off on Wednesday, and the Health and Basic Education Department, they're busy now sorting out the required logistics. Over 500,000 teaching personnel will receive the Johnson & Johnson jabs. I'm joined by Francois Fenter, Professor of Medicine at eNCA. Let me get to the big issue, Francois. Are you happy about this prioritization of teachers? Can you hear me, Francois?
I completely understand the desperation on the part of parents, of kids. I can hear you perfectly. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Please go ahead.
So I completely identify with the desperation from parents, from kids, from learners themselves, all wanting to get back to get the education. The problem I have is I don't think this is particularly well thought through. Even if we vaccinated every single teacher tomorrow, we will not protect them from the third wave. I think it would be far better to pay attention to keeping the schools as safe as humanly possible and just trying the best you can in terms of trying to get people who have been exposed home. What we're seeing at the moment, though, is part of an incoherent government response, which is trying to, we haven't even vaccinated 20% of our old people yet, not a single person under 60 with a comorbidity, and yet we're suddenly throwing vaccines at other groups in this piecemeal fashion without any explanation as to why it's being done that so far. If you were going to vaccinate within the schools, it would probably make more sense to vaccinate the old people within the homes that the children are returning to. But why stop at the teachers? Why not vaccinate the parents, the taxi drivers and the bus drivers taking the children to school? It's just not a coherent response.
You talk about the fact that we've only got to 20% of 60-pluses. Interesting. Anecdotally, I went to a particular vaccination site on Friday. This was about 10:30 in the morning. It's a huge facility, and there was nobody there except the resources. So there were vaccines, there were nurses, and there was nobody in line. And obviously I asked them, what's going on? And the reality is the resources are being provided, but people are not necessarily turning up. It seems like a gross waste of energy, time, effort. How do we fix that? We were speaking yesterday to one of the people who's an advisor to the Gauteng Department of Health to understand whether they're getting that kind of data, that there are facilities which are lying empty. And I didn't get a sense that they actually knew what was happening on the ground. Why are we not getting this coordinated properly? Do you have any idea?
So I think that you have to create demand for these services. We know this from many of the other programs that we've done, the mass HIV programs. You can't simply sit back and say, there's a service, come hither. And unfortunately, that has been the Department of Health's response. And, the 20% of people who've been vaccinated are probably people related to us and to people who network, who have access to the media, who have access to the internet. Much of the rest of the population relies on services that are provided routinely. And government, unfortunately, has spent a lot of time not communicating where these sites are. I have so many reports of old people going to sites, getting turned away because they told them they were on a medical aid, or they didn't have the right documentation, or the sites actually run out of vaccines. So it really is a demand creation supply. A lot of government officials are saying, well, we've provided the service, it's on you now to take it up. That, when in any sort of demand creations, when only 20% of the people have taken it up, the problem is your fault. This is not vaccine hesitancy. This is bad program application. And the government needs to turn around and say, how do we make this as easy as possible rather than as difficult as possible?
All right. So I'm going to be crossing to Professor Barry Shube, who is listening to the interview. I am going to bring him in right now and talk to him about the interview I had yesterday with Professor Shabir Mahdi. Let me see if he can hear me. Professor Barry Shube, are you available?
Yes, hi, is that Omar?
Good, excellent. Thank you very much. It's good of you to make yourself available to us. I know that you're probably very, very busy. Yesterday I had an interview with Professor Shabir Mahdi, who's a vaccinologist, and you also are an expert in vaccines. He called some of the decisions made by the Department of Health and the MAC, perhaps the word absurd may be strong, but it certainly seemed like he wasn't very confident about some of that decision-making. I want to play you a clip of some of what he said before I chat to you.
government should be making every effort to ensure that they can actually get the vaccines that will protect lives as soon as they can. Right now, we face with a situation where government has decided now to pursue the Sinovac vaccine, which itself has got zero evidence as to whether it will protect against the beta variant when it comes to mild to moderate infection. The same thing goes for Sputnik 5. Those vaccines, in fact, against the original virus, probably perform less well than the AstraZeneca vaccine against the original virus. So for some reason, not to have used the AstraZeneca vaccine and then blindly to actually decide to actually pursue the Sinovac vaccine, where we got absolutely no evidence how it will work against the beta variant. Again, I'm not too clear what the thinking is and what the logic is, and who actually advises government on these sort of matters.
But shouldn't you be advising them? Or is that just out of your
government chose to exclude a few people from the Ministerial Advisory Committee, myself included, and this has got nothing to do with me or a few others that were excluded. So again, we're not part of the Ministerial Advisory Committee. We've been making our position clear in the media publicly that it was an incorrect decision not to pursue the AstraZeneca vaccine. Another completely absurd decision on the part of government was not to actually use a Novavax vaccine, a vaccine which together with the two messenger RNA vaccines, the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, where there's global consensus in the scientific community that those three vaccines are probably the best vaccines that are around. And yet government and its advisors decided not for South Africa not to actually pursue the Novavax vaccine, which in the country itself was shown to have at least 60% protection against mild to moderate COVID-19 and 100% protection against severe COVID-19 due to the beta variant. Yet government and its advisors simply decided that the Novavax vaccine was not fit for purpose for South Africa, but we would rather use the Sinovac vaccine or the Sputnik 5 vaccine, for which there's zero evidence as to how it would actually perform against the beta variant.
So, Professor Shub, I think that means you when he says this is the kind of advice government is getting. What's your response?
Sorry, Omar, are you talking to me?
Yes, I am. I want to know what your response is.
Oh, sorry, Omar. Okay. Now, I think, unfortunately, Professor Marty's got his facts wrong. The government is not pursuing Sinovac. It's not pursuing Sputnik in the terms of ordering it. We, as a Ministerial Advisory Committee, have got an open mind to all vaccines. We're examining all vaccines, including AstraZeneca. We haven't dismissed AstraZeneca. We suspended AstraZeneca in the beginning because there was no data. Professor Murray did a very good trial, and he himself said there's no evidence that is working against mild to moderate infection, and it's just a supposition that it may work against severe infection. And there's no data to actually prove that. In fact, there's some laboratory data which suggests that it may well not prevent severe infection. And that's really the reason why we decided at that stage to suspend AstraZeneca. It was a difficult decision. The vaccine was in the country. But we took advice from local authorities. We took advice from international authorities. We've got a working group with 4 of the top international authorities in the field. And the bottom line was that we decided to suspend it, but it's certainly not off the radar screen. We are still looking at all those vaccines. But the problem with all the vaccines, AstraZeneca, Sinovac, and Sputnik, the Russian vaccine, is that there's no data to show how effective it will be against the variant. With regard to Novavax, we have had several meetings with Novavax. We do want to kind of look at Novavax further. The only one problem, Novavax hasn't applied to the regulatory authority it hasn't supplied any data to them. That's really what's holding up Novavax.
Okay, so let's pause there. Let's pause there and let's try and understand this issue with the AstraZeneca vaccine. I want to give Professor Venter a chance. Is the AstraZeneca vaccine proven to be successful against the beta variant in South Africa?
Yes, it has, in terms of stopping severe disease. And Professor Shub needs to talk about these international local working groups. When WHO, which I think we can agree is a very important normative agency, has strongly advocated for the AstraZeneca vaccine locally. Professor Mahdi's study showed no benefit against mild disease, but that's not what we're interested in. We're worried about people ending up in hospital and ICU. There's increasing evidence that all the vaccines will have breakthrough infections, that people will get snotty noses, that they will be repeatedly infected with the virus. He needs to tell us why that decision was made and why it wasn't rescinded at the time. We lost out on vaccinating 500,000 South Africans in January. We're now stuck with a glacial vaccine program, which is going to take, by the current estimates, probably between 5 and 10 years to vaccinate the entire population. AstraZeneca vaccine was a critical part of that vaccine armamentarium, which they sent away. And since then, you know, we've been found sorely lacking in terms of having available options.
So, Professor Shub, let's take that up now. If we had the AstraZeneca vaccine, and it seems that there's a consensus among some of our scientists, like Professor Venter, like Professor Mahdi, that it would have prevented serious illness, it would prevent you going into hospital, it would prevent you possibly dying. That's the situation we're now facing in Gauteng, a potential crisis where we don't have beds. If we had AstraZeneca, supposition, we may not have been in this position. Accurate or not?
Totally inaccurate. If Professor Fent is on the line, I would like you to ask him what evidence there is that AstraZeneca would prevent serious disease. He can't quote the WHO because the WHO said every vaccine will prevent every variant. They've been taken to task for saying that, and they've said that because they basically want to keep AstraZeneca on the armamentarium. I want to ask you if you could ask him what scientific evidence there is, because I can supply some scientific evidence to suggest, I'm saying suggest, because there's no clinical trial to show it, but suggest that it won't work. But first ask him if he's got evidence to show that it will work.
All right,
he's making very bold statements,
very
definite statements. I'd like him to back it up with evidence.
Let's do that. So, Professor Venter, you've heard that. Professor Shub is saying that there is no categoric evidence that the AstraZeneca vaccine would prevent serious illness. How do you contend?
So there are many vaccines where we don't have perfect evidence for every single variant. The AstraZeneca vaccine has been used in tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people, and we have not seen breakthrough vaccine from any variants, not just the beta variant, the one that originated, well, we think might have originated in South Africa. So when Professor Shub says there's not perfect evidence, sure. But if you were saying to me the worst thing that would have happened, I was given 1 million vaccines in January, or they were delivered on the 1st of March, that absolutely the worst thing that happened is that they wouldn't work. I would have grabbed it with both hands. And at this stage, we have overwhelming evidence that this vaccine works in the people that it's used. If you're going to sit there and ask for the perfect, I can supply several of these vaccine candidates that are out there, that they do not have the evidence that it protects against the beta variant. But yet we're pursuing those as well. So, you know, I take the point that there is a degree of uncertainty in all of this, but it was a really shocking decision right from the point go. We've had this debate in the academic media, and unfortunately, I think we're still at odds with this. And as I said, we still do not have the Ministerial Vaccine Advisory Committees, of which Professor Shub is a head, out in the open. We do not know who the shadowy, now local and international working groups are, and we don't know what the rationale was for the decisions. Every South African has a stake in this. We deserve transparency in this. We need to know which vaccine companies you're talking to and why they are not supplying like they're supposed to.
Okay, so Professor Shub, there's a slightly different issue that's being brought up as well, which is this issue of too much opacity. Things are opaque. We don't have as much information as South Africans as we would like. Let me give you an example. When I had Dr. Crisp on the show a couple of weeks ago, I put to him that I'd seen information that, for example, Pfizer had come in, because of the distress we were under around J&J, with a 10 million vaccine supply for South Africa. At the time, he said that was being signed and sealed, but we had no idea when those 10 million vaccines would be delivered. Can you give us an answer?
No, I can't give you an answer because the MAC is not involved. What the MAC is involved is with what Professor Venter is making very bold, emotive statements without fact. It is not correct. He is wrong. He is scientifically wrong. a J&J vaccine has been shown to be effective against the B351 variant in a clinical trial in South Africa. He cannot say that no vaccine has been shown to do that. The Pfizer vaccine laboratory has shown that the neutralizing antibodies produced are vastly in excess of what would neutralize B351. The AstraZeneca vaccine vaccinees had absolutely a wipeout of neutralizing antibodies. So he should get some scientific knowledge before he makes these bold statements, because he is ignorant of the facts. I can agree with him with one thing, and that's the opacity. But maybe there may be one other thing, is that people don't want to listen to what we are talking, what we are saying in the media, like, for example, now. And, you know, it is just totally unfair to kind of make these bold, unscientifically founded statements. The scientific committee, if he wants to know, is David Montefiore, is Barney Graham, who designed the insert. It is Florian Kappa from Duke, and it's the cell mediator guy's name just...
It's all right. I don't think we need to get into that. Let me get into, because I've got the valuable time that you're giving me, let me try and help all of us as South Africans understand some very important issues. Is the Delta variant, which is supposed to be 60% more transmissible, is that in South Africa right now, and is it a variant of concern? Professor Schuh.
Sorry, I missed that.
Is the Delta variant, the one that's considered now 60% more transmissible, the one that is common in India, is that in South Africa, and is it a variant of concern in our country right now?
The Delta variant is, well, so far it's been fairly well contained. It's been people that have travelled into South Africa. So far, it hasn't. Of the isolates which have been genotyped, close on 99% have been B351, the beta variant. So far, neither the Alpha variant or the Delta variant has spread extensively. This is not to say that that will always hold like this, but for whatever reason, and this we don't understand scientifically as yet, the beta variant seems to dominate in this country. And in that respect, we are almost unique. It has certainly spread in southern African countries. It's spread in East African countries. But it's no good, Professor Venter, saying that the vaccines have been shown to be that AstraZeneca. AstraZeneca is a very good vaccine. I'll totally agree with it. It's a good vaccine which works very well against the Alpha variant and of course, the ancestral variants. And it probably will also work quite well against the Delta variant. There's preliminary evidence showing that it has. It does not work against the beta variant. And Professor Marty concluded his trial saying that it does not work against mild to moderate variant.
Well, I'm glad Prof. Schuh, I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things Prof. Marty has said on the record, not once but multiple times, is that if you combine a single shot of the Pfizer vaccine with a second jab of the AstraZeneca vaccine, or it might be the other way around, you actually get far better protection against multiple variants. They're proven to be stronger. So in a sense, that's an argument to say that the AstraZeneca vaccine does have a very important role to play.
We don't know that yet. We don't know that yet. This is something which may well be something worth pursuing. It is something which is being investigated to use. You see, at the moment, the kind of supply chain, according to the Department of Health, and we don't do the procurement, is pretty full. But obviously, we do need to have a third vaccine as a backup, and or a third strategy also as a backup. Right. And the what we call a heterologous prime boost. In other words, one vaccine, which could be AstraZeneca, and another vaccine, which could be Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer. Okay,
so let's pause there. Let's pause.
Some combination, maybe.
Sure, let's pause. I'm not going to ask whether we can do that immediately, but I think it really is something that is a matter of urgency, and Professor Marty certainly seemed to say it in a very categoric way. I want to move to a couple of quick questions. This, in today's newspaper, Peter Bruce spoke about something that came from ground up, about the syringes that we are using in this country, where instead of getting 6 doses of the Pfizer vaccine, we're only getting 5. That's very, very worrying, because Ground Up says that means we're going to lose 300,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine as a result of the fact that our syringes are not fit for purpose. That's a very, very concerning report that we saw. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I saw that. And I was also equally concerned about it as well. But I also, was it in previous also one of the other articles that they are now ordering 1 milliliter, syringes where that wastage won't be a factor. Did you also see that? I saw that.
Well, I see that is coming, but the problem is right now we are on track to lose. Why would we not have been able to preempt this? Is there some things that we haven't properly organized when we had enough time to do so? Like, for example, the syringe.
Look, I'm sure you're right. It is so easy to kind of point fingers when these things happen. Sometimes, one learns on the job, to draw out in a syringe, a 3 ml syringe versus a 1 ml syringe. Yeah, maybe they should have foreseen that, or maybe it's something that you do, you kind of, when you're experiencing it, then you kind of learn on the job.
All right, sure. Are we learning something else? Very important final question. Are we learning something else on the job? Is the science showing that certain ethnicities are more susceptible or more vulnerable to fatality, to mortality from this particular virus than others? Is that something we're learning in this country?
So I don't think there's evidence of that as yet. Certainly, the European studies, they've shown that ethnic minorities, and the American studies, that ethnic minorities do fare worse. But what is still being investigated, is it intrinsic to the ethnicity, or is it the living conditions? And so far, the kind of evidence seems to point rather to the living conditions rather than that certain ethnicities are more susceptible.
Okay, and then final wrap, very quickly. Why the change from the intention originally to vaccinate those with comorbidities along with 60-pluses? Was that science-driven, medically driven? No.
All I can say is that we as a VAC wanted to, and we're still pursuing, incorporating the younger comorbidities. What the Department of Health, their rationale is that the majority, and they are correct in this, the majority of comorbidities would fall in the age group. In other words, the majority of comorbidities are people over the age of 60. That is true. But what we are fighting for ourselves is to include the younger people with severe comorbidities, because at the moment it's purely on an age stratification.
Thank you very much for your time. Professor Shub, who's chair of the MAC, who advises government on COVID-19 and vaccine strategies, and of course Professor Venter, Francois Venter, who's professor of medicine at eNCA. Thank you very much.